okay. As promised, October, and it is actually still in October, which is we are getting ourselves ahead of the game for the first time. We welcome back society members. We are excited to share with you the bourbon that is on its way to you right now. And we really have shifted gears this month. And I think it's exciting because I learned a lot about this whiskey, this bourbon, something that I had written off long ago, something that I haven't had in a long time. And I'm pretty excited about it. So from a standpoint of writing this thing, we went with we're going to punch you in the face with the last bourbon. Yeah. So what was our last bourbon?
Eagle Rare.
Eagle Rare. 10-year Buffalo Trace single barrel, absolute flavor bomb. And so we hope you enjoyed it because it was perfect for learning to taste whiskey with your new whiskey wheel and your whiskey tasting chart. So I think that is the really way to. I can pick out vanilla and caramel and tobacco and all the things in that one, because it's really just being laid on thick.
Well, it's one of our favorite go-tos.
Well, for sure, because it's you're getting a lot for your money, and you can find it. Yep. So now we're going to shift gears from where you can find it, but it's allocated and it's starting to get more rare, to a whiskey that you can literally probably find in almost any grocery store. And it's insane because I learned something about this bourbon that made me quadruple check myself. Yes. From a factual standpoint. Yes. So Larceny, before we get into the brand, let's talk about wheated bourbons. So wheated bourbons are a whole other category and something super iconically American. Before America, nobody's making primarily whiskey or wheated based whiskeys. And it's because, again, it was what was prevalent.
Sure.
In certain areas of the country. As you got your corn's super prevalent here. They started layering it in with different grains that they could get their hands on, and wheat was something they could get their hands on, and that's not naturally grown in a lot of other places making whiskey. So you start getting into your wheated bourbons, and some of your most famous wheated bourbons out there, and some of them, of course, your Pappies, your Wellers. More commonly drank, and you just kind of brought this up a second ago, Maker's Mark. Fundamental pillar of American whiskey drinking, are all wheated bourbons. But there's a tendency with wheat. So in your experience with wheat, what do you get different out of a wheated bourbon versus a high rye?
I think it's just sweeter.
Yeah.
I think I get a little bit more sweetness when I'm drinking a wheated bourbon. Although there's some high ryes that are pretty sweet as well, but I think that overall it's an easy drinker.
Yeah,
it's something that's smooth and balanced, and I think that's why Maker's Mark is so popular.
Yeah, I'll go with I don't think it's necessarily sweeter, but it's less spicy.
Definitely less spicy.
Less heat.
You don't feel the heat as much, and for me, my palate, that means automatic. I'm thinking, it's a little bit sweeter. Yeah. But you're right. That's exactly what it is. You pick up the notes differently.
Absolutely. Because you don't get distracted by all the heat and all the spice. Yeah. So your wheated bourbon's also just a softer mouthfeel. It's a rounder feel on the tongue. The mouthfeel is a little creamier or a little softer. Also, for a beginning drinker, it's a lot easier it's an easier palate to taste.
Especially on ice. A wheated bourbon on ice. Yeah. Very easy drinking.
Yeah, especially if you're coming off something hot and traditionally high proof, and then you go into a wheated bourbon and throw a cube of ice in it, you're like, man, it doesn't even taste like alcohol anymore. But that's not true for everybody. I'm just saying if you've gone out there and you've had those kind of glasses, and then you go straight into, if you had even your Kentucky vintage from month one, or something like that, and then you go straight into a pure wheated bourbon, it's going to be like, man, this is really light. Yeah. And it's not. Here's something that tonight we poured it as we were making some dinner and getting ready for this video. And I was like, holy shit, man. I taste and smell. I couldn't get it out of my nose. Toasted coconut, and I'm like, this is incredible. Like I got on this whole other like I can't believe that I don't drink this more, just because I'm revisiting it for the first time in years. So let's get into it a little bit. So we got Larceny. We've got a couple versions that we put up here. This is what we sent you. This is the Larceny small batch. This is, and here's the one that I couldn't believe. How old is the whiskey in this bottle, Jason?
I think it was unbelievable to hear that it was a 6 to 12 year aged bourbon. I
didn't believe it. I quadruple checked because I kept reading it and I kept going, there's no way that's right. So Heaven Hill Distillery, you've got the whole history of the distillery and it was named after and all that fun stuff in your actual package. So I'm not going to revamp that. But the idea that this guy is a 6 to 12-year-old blended whiskey from Heaven Hill in the family of one of the most prestigious and hard to get bottles of whiskey right now in Old Fitz. Mm-hmm. It kind of blew my mind. I remembered it's Old Fitz, but it took me getting back into it to kind of remember. And then the idea that this bottle, which you can find for $22 to $25 in your stores with really soft layers of really delicious things. We talked about it, and I don't want to make this into a romance story, but if we get into the flavor profile, it's a pretty woody bourbon, but it's got some cherries. I don't think I remember tasting it before I bottled it last time. And remember, this is small batch, and they actually claim less than 200 barrels per batch. So you can buy a bottle and then buy a bottle, the next week at the same store, and it could come from a different batch, and it might have different notes. So that's why you buy single barrels and small batches, and it's not always the same homogenized giant vat of juice that they're bottling to try to maintain consistency. This is over and over again following the process, but different things will happen. Hotter summers, colder winters, different places in the rick house, all the fun stuff.
But I can attest to the fact that it is a smooth bourbon regardless of the year and where you find it. Yeah. And for the price point, it's an unbelievable bourbon that you can find anywhere that is just a tasty go-to. Yeah. You can put it in a cocktail. This is a bartender's dream right here. This is the kind of bourbon that you can mix into just about anything, and it'll taste fantastic. But also great neat and on the rocks. And for the price point, you just can't beat it.
Yeah, I was a little dismissive, and we started talking about its lineage and its story and Heaven Hill and going into weeded bourbons and understanding what that means and the difference between some of the bourbons were poured versus. So your last bourbon in Eagle Rare is a low rye, so under 8%. This is 0%. This is 68% corn, 20% rye, and 12% malted barley. And that 20% rye is like 20% wheat is like a third more wheat than most other wheated bourbons. So it's a high wheat whiskey.
Well, it's still 92 proof.
Yeah.
And so, it's not your typical 90 proof, which is what most, bourbons are. Yeah. So it gives you a little bit extra there, but at the same time, it must balance nicely when they're distilling that to get to that 92. With that wheat, because it's got that, what I consider the kind of sweetness, but smoothness, for sure.
Column still distilled as opposed to a pot still. That's something we might explore at some other point of just the difference between that and the impact it has on the bourbon. But super interesting. Now, so we kind of got a different bottle out here, and I'm going to tell you a brief story. So I should just say your family of bourbons. If you really, really like this, if this is something that you're like, hey man, that's easier for me. I really enjoy that. Awesome. Well, that's the first thing. So you start to know maybe you like weeded bourbons and maybe you like that softer aspect and that little bit more of a layered and nuanced flavor. We're going to get to the tasting profiles in a second. But this is readily available. This is everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
You can get it anywhere, and this can be your daily drinker. If you really like it and you want to explore it a little bit, this is Larceny Barrel Proof. The Barrel Proof is
it's uncut.
It's uncut. It's last year's whiskey of the year. It obviously, just because of that, the demand for it's a bit higher. The price point on this guy is pretty much triple this guy, but absolutely an amazing pour. And this guy at, what does it say, 121 proof? So this guy's uncut versus this guy, so a little bit higher.
It'll give you the heat you're looking for.
Yeah, so that now you start talking about some of that softness and roundness, but added with some of the complexity that comes from a little bit more heat from the alcohol. And then finally, these guys are both just the grandchildren of, although not designed to be that way, which is the other thing when I was reading about it, this was supposed to be the premium brand of Old Fitz. But if you've been out there before, I don't own a bottle of Old Fitz because when I could buy one, I kind of was like, I'll get to it. And now, if you find one for under $400, that's a deal. Yeah. Well, I won't call it a deal. I don't think it's a good value, but that is the price point for it on the secondary market.
This is a good value.
Yeah, for sure, man. For sure. I'm not daily drinking $400 bottles of bourbon, and but these guys are from the mash bill lineage. They're just cut differently and aged differently and blended differently, but they are from Old Fitz. And so really cool lineage, really cool story. Gets us a little bit into the, do you remember, as we do this, can you start to do it on the fly now? Well, what are you getting? What notes are you getting?
I'm getting a lot of fruit.
Yeah?
It's fruity to me.
Okay.
I get a little bit of apricot. I actually get a little bit of cinnamon in this,
yeah.
which I think is probably not in a lot of the tasting notes. But
yeah. What is, though, and what often I think that cinnamon is cedar.
Okay.
Cedar as opposed to oak.
Good
and
point.
When I think of this, if you've ever had a hamster and you kind of get that fresh cedar, or you've got a shoehorn that's made of cedar.
I get a little vanilla.
Yeah, there's some vanilla in cedar, but the cedar for me is where I get the cinnamon. It's a more subtle smell than that pure cinnamon for me. But then cherry, up front, and I can't get over why, and I don't think I would ever use this officially, but tonight and right now, I keep getting a light note of toasted coconut, and I can't get it out of my nose.
Well, I can't either now because you keep mentioning it, and I'm like, that's probably true.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of coconut there.
Yeah, so
and you'll never read about that anywhere.
No, but that's a kind of cool note for me. From a taste standpoint, the wood takes over pretty quick, but not in a heavy way. Sometimes you'll describe things as a wet oak or heavy oak. This to me is, it's described as being a heavy wooded bourbon, and it is, but it's a light flavor of the wood. So I taste the wood always.
Yeah.
Hey, I can't believe I just got.
I'm glad we got that on video too. So thank you very much. You guys go ahead and stop that and put that out on YouTube.
But for me, this light oak smell, our light wood taste, really is kind of dominant throughout. Get a little bit of milk chocolate, a little bit of candied orange, but God, it's so subtle. It's compared to last month where it's just, I taste four things and I taste them deeply.
And when you think of a lot of oak, you think of it as being, just overpowering and thick. The reality is that it's really smooth and light. Yeah. And even though you're getting that oak flavor, it's a subtle kind of oak flavor.
Yeah. Finish wise, not an overly long finish, but it's for, again, the price point. I think you taste the age a little bit. You get that 6 to 12 year, and the fact that it lingers a little bit. You do have a little bit of a woody finish, and it's just, I don't know, man. Like I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed revisiting Larceny after years of collecting different things and trying to get more and more and more of the stuff that's hard to get, you kind of go back to some of these things that are just readily available, and you taste them again, and you're like, man, this is really tasty. I've really enjoyed kind of going back and revisiting it. I hope you do as well. And I think it's a great contrast from two very approachable, very easy to drink, very available whiskeys,
for sure,
back-to-back months, from Eagle Rare to Larceny, of 10-year to 6 to 12 year, but a low rye versus a high wheat, that 10 years in those barrels and that mash bill, producing a deep concentrated flavor profile, and then 6 to 12 years in a different barrel and a different mash bill with light layers of wood, cherry, I'll throw it in there, toasted coconut, and a little bit of like candied orange. So really, really a cool bourbon. I'm so glad we included this.
Well, I hope everybody appreciates the fact that, last month we did Eagle Rare 10 year, and like you just said, 6 to 12 year. These are the kind of bourbons you can find at your local spot, whatever that may be. And they're both really good bourbons for what I would consider an inexpensive price, a daily drinker kind of situation. And when I first, interesting, just side note, it was the Nulu toasted barrel that we had found at one of our liquor stores that we like to go to. And I had, the only way I could buy the Nulu toasted barrel was to do it with a package deal with the Larceny.
Is that where you got it?
That's where I got it.
Okay.
And actually, when I talked to you about it, and you're like, oh yeah, Larceny, no big deal. I got home and drank it and was like, whoa, that is pretty dang good. And I told you about it, you dismissed it.
That is true.
And then here we are, and it was a really nice find for me. I hadn't had Larceny before. You may have had some experience with Larceny, but it's a recommended bourbon that you can find anywhere right now, and that's why we're featuring it.
Yeah.
And I hope that everybody knows that everything that we've curated, everything that we find every month, from month to month, are things that we enjoy.
Yeah,
I mean, we're not bringing anything to you that is something that we haven't tried, that we haven't tested, that we haven't enjoyed, or we wouldn't even bring it to you.
Yeah.
So
I'll never collect a hard to find bottle and share with you just because it's a name.
Yeah, and that's not what we do. And so just know that we stand by the fact that it is an inexpensive bourbon that's delicious. So
this month's bourbon brought to you by Jason Smith. So no, it's a great find. I'm glad he got it, and I'm glad we kind of revisited, because this isn't like hey, what are we going to pour this month? We've got plenty of things to pour. This is I think it's a great contrast to last month that shows you the variety and shows you the depth of flavor that you can get from different types of mash bills. It's the perfect timing for it after you get your tasting profile wheels and go from a Eagle Rare into this guy. And then you just realize that there's a whole spectrum out there. And we're going to continue to try to provide that to you with something different and a different kind of story, or a different kind of mash bill, different kind of element month over month. So.
And also, I think, remember that there are not a lot of weeded bourbons out there.
Yeah, it's certainly not
a very limited supply of variety of weeded bourbons, and I've only come across 3 or 4 of note, and this is probably one of the better ones at the price point. So
yeah. So again, we appreciate we know this one a little long, but that's what we do.
As they usually do.
You can always fast forward or mute us. So
or turn us off, but drink the bourbon and get your friends to subscribe and grab a membership.
Yep. So thank you so much, guys. Cheers, and I can't wait to see what we pour for you in November. Get ready for Thanksgiving.
Cheers.
Bye bye.